on the technology side of things, like maybe people start thinking of bigger solutions, right? Solutions more centric to their world, right? What is a fintech problem that's more acute to the rural Kenya rather than Nairobi? What's a biotech solution that's more specific to improving the health of tilapia in Lake Victoria? Or is Africa going to play a part in the growth of Africa? Is Africa going to build for Africa, or are we just going to consume things that have been made outside?
I'm here with Rahul Srivatsa. Rahul, thanks for coming on.
Elvis, it's a pleasure. How are you?
I'm good. So you're with Technobrain.
That's right. Yeah.
What is Technobrain?
Well, we're the typical IT outsourcing and IT consulting company. We're based out of a couple of locations. I'm up here in Seattle, Washington. We have a bunch of folks here in America, but operationally, most of our stuff is done from Nairobi, Kenya, and India as well. So we're all over the place. Yeah.
And what does Technobrain do? What are the tasks that you outsource
Yeah. So
or that you
there's
do for
a couple of things that we specialize in. Relating to software development and IT outsourcing. That's really our forte. So we do a lot of quality assurance, test automation, privacy testing, accessibility testing, security testing. But we also do niche projects like a lot of service integration stuff. Back in the day, well, that's about 30 days ago before the US aid upheaval. We worked a lot with NGOs and helping them migrate from one ERP system to another, understand data migration, reporting standards, and we also help a little bit with their finance and accounting for multi-country operations. So it's really a broad swath of services. Obviously, we have a small call center operation as well. We have about, I think, 100 people doing call center stuff. A mix of customer service, legal back office, collections, and the like. So it's a diverse group. 200 or so are on the engineering and IT outsourcing side of things, and then 100 are voice agents.
And how many do you have overall? Like you're in Nairobi
Yeah, so in
and
Nairobi, we have about 300 something people. We have about 15 people in India, and then we have a team of 5 here in the US. So that's Technobrain
okay.
GBS. We have a sister company, Technobrain Enterprise Solutions. They're more focused on the public sector side of things. So we also do a lot of identity management implementations, public financial management systems, IFMIS, tax and customs, and the likes. So they play on a more government, county, province, national government level, but we're more catered to the private sector, NGO side of things.
I interviewed one of your colleagues back in the Stone Ages in 2016 in Nairobi.
Really? Do you recall
I
who
don't
that was?
I should have Yeah, I should have looked this up. I should have done this before I should have prepared better. No, I don't. And we had an interesting conversation. And he told me a lot about how Techno. I'm sure a lot has changed, but how Technobrain was doing a lot of schooling to like skilling. That it
Yeah.
was a mixture between IT outsourcing, offshoring, and a skilling, like a schooling almost. I don't know if that was like the business plan back then. Like a lot of times when I do interviews, people tell me about where they want to go with a company, but of course this is like almost 10 years ago. Is this still big part of your undertaking, skilling?
Sort of. So we actually started as an IT training company way back in 1997 in Tanzania, and I think for sort of the first good chunk of our company history, the IT Training Institute was our core business. I think for the first 5 years or so, we set up shop in various countries across sub-Saharan Africa in IT training. But we pivoted away from that focus, when we started building skills in IT, software developers, engineers, testers, IT personnel, and so on. We leveraged these guys to then build our own IP in the public sector. And then we became a solution provider, a software provider, and a service integrator rather than just focusing on IT training. But Having said that, we branched off our IT training into a separate organization. That entity is still running. It's not under Technobrain, but it's sort of sold off. But I will say you can't be an organization without training your people. So, in one capacity or the other, upskilling folks is pretty much a priority. So we do train people ongoingly. We help people get certifications. Our own folks get certifications, get upskilled, be with the times, really.
Right. So you mentioned that the USAID upheaval has directly affected you, your business, just or is currently directly affecting your business.
That's correct. Yeah. We had a lot of work ongoing and possible work as well to come in, helping, companies with their ERP implementation specifically. There was a couple of projects that we were doing, and a couple more that we wanted to do, or we were going to get in Feb and March. But effective, I mean, it was a 1 week notice. This happened so suddenly. When the executive order was signed, we didn't really understand the scope of it. What projects would get waivers? What projects would be shut down immediately? Given that a lot of the folks within the USAID were fired or furloughed. I don't know what the term is. Um, Even the folks who need to process the waivers and stuff, they were not available. So there was a lack of clarity on what projects are continuing, what projects aren't, and we don't directly benefit from USAID, but the people we work with, they get their grant money from USAID. So that was a bit of a shock, but we're dealing with it. I think the bigger concern is a lot of these are very mission oriented NGOs who have some of them are in healthcare, and their ability to service people, their mission, that has been impacted, which is a much graver concern than what we're going through business wise.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm hearing stories all over. I mean, we've got elections coming up in 4 days.
Right.
It's Thursday, February 20th now when we're taping this. So on Sunday, we're going to have elections. And AFD, so the far right party, is at about 20%, according to polls, which these days I'm not sure you can trust because, if somebody's telling a pollster, they probably not voting for AFD.
Yeah.
There's something in the air. I mean, obviously, when this airs, it's going to be after the election, probably. So, and I'm currently on a GIZ contract. This research we're doing is GIZ, which is the equivalent to USAID. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, uncertain times. That's all we can say about this.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So we're doing a study. We've been tasked by GIZ, as long as that exists, to find out to some extent what impact AI has on the global business services (GBS) sector, the umbrella term for business process outsourcing, IT outsourcing, knowledge process outsourcing, anything you can export from a location in the global south. And in this case, we're looking at Ghana and Rwanda as case studies. But really, what I'm looking at is globally and regionally, what are we seeing in terms of can we feel our way through the fog of change right now? What are these changes that are happening? How could we prepare for them in terms of skilling?
Mhm.
What are we teaching young people in these geographies in order to kind of skate towards where the puck is going to be? Uh, it's super hard for us. I don't know if you have the answer. You'd be the first one I speak to. No disrespect to all my other interviewees. I mean, it's how do you feel about this whole topic? Do you want to take any angle on this? I'm just opening up the field for you. What's getting automated away? What's getting upskilled?
Right.
What's getting created? Right? Are there new tasks, AI tasks being created with this stuff, or is it all just kind of, are we too worried about it? Is it actually going to be more of the usual?
Yeah, that was a loaded question. So let me start picking at bits here and there. Are we uh, too worried about it? I don't think so. I think we're the right amount of worried about it. I don't, I'm not on the train that thinks, oh, there's going to be such a devastating impact on labor that we're going to have to think of a different society to begin with. I think there's going to be a little bit of a transition period before we reach that stage. But I think now is a good time to start worrying about what that, transition looks like, right? Because in my opinion, AI has come so far in the 4 years. When I started doing my first gig outside of college, I was trying to build a recommendation system. Right, this was machine learning and data science back then, and it was already so advanced that I didn't have to build any of the programs themselves. You sort of look at open source packages and then implement it into your solution. So you have to understand programming, obviously, and you have to understand system architecture, but you didn't have to build the base models, the recommendation engine itself. You might have to tweak it, but you didn't have to build the base models. And this was 2019, 2020. And 2 years later, when the I forget which version of ChatGPT came out, it was revolutionary. Being able to build a scraper to scrape the website became a whole lot easier. I mean, a matter of hours rather than days. So that shift happened so quickly. But even in as early as 2022, 2023, for the specific context of the BPO industry, for example, I'd go to a conference and I'd try to talk to these voice bots and chat bots, and they were good, but almost immediately you can figure out you're talking to a machine. Maybe if your accent's a little bit, they might not understand exactly what you're saying. There was a lot of room for improvement, but that improvement has happened, right? So if you talk to any voice agents today, maybe not deployable at an enterprise level, but if even the existing chat GPT, to be able to speak to it, right, it has come so far that I think the conversation has to shift according to the advancements made. So, folks that are saying, hey, I don't think the call center operations are going to get taken away because you still need the human element, I don't necessarily buy that. I think it's a matter of time. I think if you're a business, person, and you have to make a decision, and you're able to reduce 80% of your costs by implementing a voice agent, and you can keep the rest 20% for physical people for specific cases, it's a no-brainer, right? So why would companies go to BPOs to spend all this money and staff their people if they don't have to? And right now we're at that stage where the BPOs have realized this and they're trying to incorporate AI solutions. Uh, I foresee they might not even need to do that going forward, or that's my hypothesis at least.
They
Um,
might not. Sorry, go ahead.
no, no, please.
No, I'm just kind of just following up on that train of thought. They might not even have to do that because their clients are already automating, or how you walk me through that, please.
Yeah, so let's say you have Airbnb, for example. You need customer support, right? Currently, they have folks sitting probably all around the world, US, other places, and they're not doing the customer service themselves. Maybe they have some in-house operation, but a lot of it is done by third-party vendors, right? But when this solution matures to a level where you can just download a software, select the number of users, upload your case studies, build your personas of how these people are supposed to communicate, adjust levers when it comes to, tone, seriousness, humor, all of these things, right? Why would they need to go to a BPO at all? Maybe you just need an internal team to manage that. It's not there yet. I think we're still a ways away from it. But if you think of these CCaaS solutions, the big ones like Genesis, Avaya, and all these guys, I think they eventually transition to something like that, right? Rather than even relying on the BPO, they go one step above and just go direct to the consumer.
Do you think that would have a net negative effect on employment?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You think so? Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so interesting because there's such divergent opinions on that. So in 2013, we had this study, Fry and Osborne, 47% of jobs, of American jobs, are at high risk of getting automated away
Wow.
um, within a decade or two. That was the exact phrasing. Now that was 2013. They first wrote the working paper. So within a decade or two, the first one we already have, right? And unemployment rates aren't higher than they were back then.
Mm,
So sure, you could say we're on an exponential curve, so if we're halfway there, we're at 1%, right? That still in 2 decades, we're still going to be at 100% of those 47% of jobs. And a lot of times, contact center work, BPO work, if you have gone already as far as being able to commoditize tasks as much as allowing them to go out to a BPO,
mhm.
you're already more than halfway there to
Exactly.
automate them away, right? Like, so you're already giving it to less an expert than you would be yourself in the BPO.
Correct.
And that needs to be packaging. Like you need to, well, even in house. I mean, whenever you delegate, you need to package your delegation in a certain way, and that goes towards giving an AI agent a task. So you see that. What about this? Everybody's talking about Javon's paradox right now. So if the cheaper the demand get, the cheaper the supply of something gets, the higher the demand gets. I don't hardly ever call a call center. First, because I don't find the number, and second, because I can't be bothered. So I just Google stuff, right? Or hope there's a YouTube video on something. But if it were cheap and fast and efficient to have some combination of AI and humans, so say you increase the volume of BPO tenfold with having every BPO agent be the manager of
Of
5 AI agents. Is there a space for that? I mean, I'm just thinking of the white space on the map.
Yeah, yeah. I think that is how it's going to go, right? I mean, if you want to break it down, the L1, L2 stuff will be the ones that get automated, and you keep the L3 folks to be there for the escalations when you finally get there, right? And then, mind you, there's going to be a period of trial and error, right? So you don't know if you can automate all of L2. So you might need that phase where you need L2 and L3 as humans, but L1 is the one that gets automated. So it's different steps to get to that position. But I don't think in absolute terms we're going to increase the number of people in the BPO industry just because more BPOs and the demand for BPOs itself will rise because of AI. I don't necessarily think that would happen. I mean, even today, if you think about how AI is being used right now, yeah, maybe there's some voice agents, but it's select cases, not most places. I think where AI is really being used now when in BPOs is real time support, right? When an agent is talking about something, they're bringing up certain, let's say it's a product specification or specific details about a customer. The real time ability to have that information, displayed right in front of you and almost prompting you what to say, that has impact on metrics, right? Your quality, your average handle time, whatever metrics you want to look at, it has an impact on that. And then the fact that it's cheap enough to pretty much transcribe every single call that comes in, that means you have 100% quality assurance. So you don't need every team having a QA and randomized call picking and understanding if they met the standards or not. Now you have 100% quality assurance. Every single call is understood. So you're able to weed out the bad players faster. So it's a step by step process. I think different elements will end up being shaved off as time comes. I don't think we're going to go, wave a magic wand and then 100 people disappear and we only have one person managing that. But it's more a matter of when than if.
So actually, I'm gonna have to out myself first. What is L1 and L2 and L3? What does that mean?
Sorry, it's just levels. So, if you're
Oh, level. Okay,
yeah, so
okay.
level one, level two, level three. In the scenario of let's say IT help desk, right? You have level one, which was, hey, I can't find my password, or I'm not able to log in here. Can you help me out with that? L2 could be a little more to do with your system, your network connectivity, and it's the complexity of the query itself, right? And then also depends on the industry, right? Things like customer service, which is very transaction oriented. The scope of what's happening is limited, right? So that's probably more easily automated than, let's say, collections, where you have to negotiate with the person, and you have to have more human elements, I should say, empathy, and manage anger or respond more assertively. Understand the tone and fluctuations of what that person is saying. Maybe that's going to take a little bit longer to get automated, but I say a little bit longer, but it will happen.
Right. So if you're thinking about regions, world regions, if you think about real-time translation,
Mhm.
it seems to me that the puzzle pieces for that are there for this Tower of Babel to fall. We just haven't really yet put them together, as last I checked, to have. I mean, these are prediction machines, right? So if you have a bunch of calls already going in a similar direction, you can have an AI translate in real time what the agent is saying and can even predict a half a sentence into the future. And if it predicts wrongly, then it might make a coughing sound like Notebook LM, or like is is a. I mean, these things can, or even like 11 Labs, like make your own the agent's voice. I'm not sure even. See, every time I speak about this, I catch myself thinking, okay, well, are we going to use the agent then still? Like, so I'm thinking of a translation machine, but then I'm thinking, okay, like O3 High Mini as a translation machine, why don't we just use that then as the agent? You know what I mean? Like I keep catching myself thinking, well, this is great. It's going to open up Germany. It's going to open up Scandinavia. But then I think, well, for whom though? Like who's going to be serving them? Who's going to be sitting in Kenya speaking English and having more subject matter expertise than these reasoning models? Which again, so okay, so on the one side you've got Grok, like the one with Q, like kind of these kind of hardware that can make it real fast, and on the other side you have the reasoning models who are getting smarter, but then they take longer. So maybe there's a trade off a little bit. But even like the standard models like 4.0, I think there's a direct competition. So yeah, I just started asking a question and then I just contradicted myself. So do you think there's going to be a opening up new markets for real time translation into hitherto difficult to serve markets? And how long is that going to last until the translation machine actually takes over the conversation because it's predicting it?
If you can translate it, you can reason, like you said, right?
Yeah.
I like if you look today, there are already things like accent neutralization. Yeah, right. So a lot of the big issues with folks outsourcing it is when you call someone from America and you don't have an American accent, that's that first level of barrier that you face, whether it's America or Germany or wherever you might be. If even if you're sitting in Kenya and you pick up the phone and you call someone and there's uh, a Ugandan accent or whatever that might be, right? It's immediately you sense that. So there's voice neutralization accents. I mean, for places like India, this is probably huge because in terms of BPO maturity, it's right there. But the reason maybe they have a little bit of a cap is their accent is not as easily understood here. But this immediately opens up the market. Now we're talking, you don't have to go to a tier one or tier two city. You can go to tier three or tier four city, have smart, educated folks, but because their accent is terrible, they previously wouldn't have been able to get a job. They still know English, but they wouldn't have been able to get a job in BPO. But now with accent neutralization, you can, right? So then, once that's able to work at scale in real time, I don't think it does at scale in real time yet, but I think it's about there. I've heard a few samples, and it's surprisingly good. I think there's a little bit of a lag. Sometimes you can hear it. Maybe that's just the solution that I saw. There's plenty out there. So these enterprise solutions need to mature a little bit. I think what I'm generally seeing is at a consumer level, AI is really high up there. At an enterprise level, people are yet to figure out how to integrate it with the ecosystem at large. So it's more of an infrastructure and a logistics problem more than anything else.
So if I look at the publicly traded BPOs, GBS companies, if I ask ChatGPT which are the biggest GBS companies, BPO, ITO, CX, give me a list of 15, and then I go and look which ones of these are traded, and then I look at what happened over the last 5 years to their value,
Mm,
some of them are doing very bad, are not doing well at all, and some of them are doing pretty good. I
mm,
can't really put my finger on. So market value obviously isn't head count. I'm having a hard time following what is leading to success currently in the GBS sector and what is leading to where's the trouble, and is the sector growing or shrinking in terms of people in seats? What are you seeing like globally and then maybe regionally?
yeah, it's definitely growing. I think this industry is growing right now because, like you said, the fact that BPOs have become more accessible and more cheaper, more people are trying to access BPOs, more people are trying to outsource, which wasn't the case earlier, right? So a lot of these, it's also a supply and demand issue. A lot of the companies who previously weren't thinking of outsourcing are now thinking of outsourcing. So then they get into the spectrum of what's the first step to take. Maybe they're not directly going to go into an agent or some sort of an AI automation. They need that human element first. So they're in that journey, right? So once they spend the time outsourcing, then they realize, okay, cost pressures are not alleviating, we need to do something more. Then the next stage in that journey is, okay, let's get rid of all the QA guys. We'll have a AI for QA. Let's get rid of this function, that function, and then eventually it gets there. I think in general, in terms of numbers, BPO is growing right now because the demand is increasing. But like you said, there's a lot of big BPOs that are decreasing in valuation. And I think a lot of the companies with existing contracts and legacy contracts are realizing that maybe we don't need to spend this much money on a call center operation, right?
You mean the
And
buyers?
yeah, the buyers. And I think specifically in the context of Africa, it's huge right now. All the governments are, at least in the usual suspects, the Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda, South Africa. They're really trying to get more folks employed in the BPO industry, and I think it's a good thing. So are we, but I think it's a bit short sighted to put so much effort into this industry without thinking of a plan of what happens when there is a seismic shift in demand in the solution offering itself, right?
Yeah,
And
well, Rahul, tell me what happens. I don't know. I That's what I'm trying to find out. What is going to happen?
I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, to be honest, because I think we are underplaying how quickly people can make decisions. So it is a fear for us to, and we're still trying to figure out what the contingency is, right? One thing we're trying to do is we're trying to get more people to use AI, consume it in one way or the other. So getting folks subscriptions, we get some of our developers subscriptions to Cursor. Some folks have subscriptions to ChatGPT. So there is a budget for people to use it. So internally, the motivation is how do we get the team more efficient? And it's a big learning curve, right? So most people don't know how to use ChatGPT or whatever the your selected one is to get where they need to go. They don't know the extent of possibility where it can help them, right? So that's the first step: getting them trained and getting them understanding how you can do that. And then we need to think about what happens. Let's say if a customer calls today and saying, "Hey, we've decided to go another route," what happens? And I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. I think what we're doing, at least on the engineering side of things, is developing more niche uh, capabilities and accessibility and security and privacy and things like that, because these are ever permeating concerns. But I think getting these guys to become more efficient, specifically in coding, I think is the goal. So on the voice side of things, I don't know. I don't know the answer, to be honest, because it doesn't take long for a company to make a decision. Like I said, I mean, if you look at all the big guys, the big tech companies in the US, they send out a press release, we're firing 5,000 people. This is not a big shock, not a big surprise to anyone, right? So when Kenya or Ghana or South Africa says we need 100,000 people employed in this industry, we need to be aware of what happens when sudden decisions are made, and then that happens all the time. And I don't know the answer. There has to be some sort of a discussion, a think tank, but to to sort of go, full steam ahead on the BPO industry without understanding the consequences later on, I think is a mistake.
So this current kind of rush towards, let's call it BPO, global business services, I feel I don't know. I don't want to lead with this question, but the way I saw it in the 90s, early 90s, India did really well. Then late 90s, Philippines came, and then early 2000s, we had a bunch of vision documents across Africa saying, well, we need to, like, BPO is going to be one of our flagship pillars.
Mhm.
And then in the 2010s, not really much happened across sub-Saharan Africa, anywhere between South Africa and North Africa. Right, South Africa grew, Egypt did, Morocco for French, and all that was great. But in between, there's not really anything that took off, and so there was some disgruntlement throughout the 2010s amongst policymakers, thinking, "Well, this thing didn't work," and then we had the pandemic, and we saw a lot of BPOs coming through new cities thinking, okay, well, can we set up shop here? You got any buildings? You got any office space we could use, And that's when we kind of got warmed up to them again and thinking, well, okay, if they all want to come, let's do this. Wait, maybe this thing is coming. Maybe just 10, 15 years later than we thought. Now, the pandemic thing about diversifying geographically, I always felt that that was a short term thing unless we were going to have another pandemic, which I don't know if we will soon. So, yeah, I mean, I've said this many times. I always feel like it was a comparison to after 9/11. People thought that skyscrapers weren't going to be able to rent out the top floors because companies wouldn't want to rent those.
Is that
That
so?
that narrative lasted about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about this diversification from an agglomeration like Manila. It's maybe not as pointed as that 9/11 thing, but I feel like it. I don't know if the geographic spreading out has some benefits, but I think that's kind of died down a bit from my perspective. And I just feel like we've kind of policymakers are a bit slow to kind of jump on the train, and we're maybe betting on yesterday's horse because right after the pandemic, ChatGPT came out, and I don't know. I think, is this geographic expansion, happening the way it was 2-3 years ago, or is it? Am I wrong? I don't know. I'm just really speculating. Please, if you feel differently about it, tell me.
Yeah, I don't have specific numbers, but I have seen reports from consultancies and colleagues in the industry. Um, I think geographic diversification is happening for various reasons. For starters, it's cost, right? Second is exposure. Um, for an American company or a German company or in the Western world to buy into the idea that they can outsource, they need an exposure to these markets, right? Because there was no exposure to Africa, there was no exposure to the fact that, Kenya has some of the best English in the world. It didn't happen. There was no concerted marketing effort as a country, right? A lot of India's success, a lot of Philippines' success is an organization like NASCOM coming in, getting the whole industry body together, and really putting a concerted effort to get there. I think that exposure is just starting to happen in the last 2 years in Africa. So they're forming, Africa GBS initiatives. South Africa has what is it, BESA? No, BESA?
The
Uh,
PESA, yeah.
and then Rwanda is doing incredible marketing work. So exposure is one thing, cost is the other thing, and in adjacent to the cost factor is attrition, right? Attrition is a huge problem in mature BPO destinations. So places like India, places like Philippines. I mean, we're talking about absurd attrition numbers, like right up to even almost 100% in many of these places. In a place like Kenya, we're still not at that saturation level yet. In South Africa, with those high employment rates, not at that saturation level yet. But it will get there. I think it's a matter of time, right? I mean, in a place like India, you can literally go across the street and join your competing BPO for a 5% hike. That's not the case right now in Kenya, but it might happen. So I think these are some of the reasons why folks are diversifying geographically. Culturally, I would even say that places like Kenya, South Africa, even West Africa are more aligned with how Americans think or how Europeans think than a place like India or the Philippines, right? So that's another factor, albeit a much smaller factor. Um, so these are the various reasons, in my opinion, I think people are trying to diversify. Then there's the geopolitical element, right? The world became so dependent on China, and then when China decided, not decided, but the world realized that there's differences in terms of geopolitics. So we don't want to be so reliant on China. We need a diversified, supplier source. The same thing's going to happen to India. The same thing's going to happen to Philippines. When you become too over reliant on a specific geography, it's a big risk. Anything could happen, right? The Ukraine is it's a big IT outsourcing house for Western Europe, right? And then suddenly, when that happened, we saw a lot more noise from European companies on, okay, where else are we going to look for a partner? Traditionally they go with India, they go with China, but now China is less of an option. So people are looking at other geographies to see, is there a future bet we can make right now? Right? Maybe we'll be wrong, but we have to make that bet because over reliance has clearly served us wrong in the past.
That's interesting. That's the second time in 2 days that I've heard this. Not putting words in your mouth, but this idea of a kind of, because of the China America rivalry, this new Cold War starting up, that could actually spill over into a larger East West thing. I know you didn't just say that. I'm just kind of thinking more along those lines. And then geographic diversification is that people are thinking in that direction. See, from our industry, from the development perspective,
Yes.
development aid it's just looking at demographics and saying, okay, we need to create jobs. We just before spoke offline about elections coming up. No, it was online, was it? We were already live,
I think we were
right?
like,
We
yeah.
were already doing this. Yeah, yeah, okay, all right. Let me just rephrase that. As we just said, so there's a lot of interest in Europe to create jobs in Africa, regardless of where on the political spectrum you are.
Mhm.
Right? The one half wants it to happen because it's the right thing to do. The other half because otherwise people come to Europe. Um, and so this idea of betting on this horse, we've seen historically that export sectors have been the kinds of sectors where growth happens the fastest. And especially if you're exporting something that's based on your knowledge, so in manufacturing or in services. The question is now, is this the thing that's going to happen for Africa the way it happened for East Asia with manufacturing? Is it going to be services exports to drive development in Africa, um, integrating into global value chains, having large knowledge transfers, spillovers in these value chains? And I mean, there's this, for me, and correct me if you think this is different, there's this strong correlation between Indian CEOs in Silicon Valley and India's bet on the software sector. I don't know if they have anything to do with each other. I like to think they do. It's my kind of my Cinderella story. You start out with BPO and you end up CEO of Google and Microsoft. Obviously, those two guys didn't come through a BPO. Yeah. But to some extent, I think like the ecosystem of software exporting, work your way up the value chain. That's kind of a nice story, and I would hope that's the story of Africa in the next 40 years. Do you buy into that, or do you think that's just utopian? It's never going to happen like that, and it didn't happen like that in India.
It did happen, in my opinion. It did happen like that. Um, and I also hope that this is the trajectory for Africa as well. And if you look at specific countries in Africa that are a little more service oriented, you're already seeing some of this shift. But going back to the India example, right? In the 90s and the early 2000s, with the dot-com bubble, internet, all of these things became very viable, and India started getting in on the action. And if you look at where they got in on the action, it was the lower spectrum of the technical work that needed to be done, right? So basic testing, basic software development, and the likes. And I think this happened for a variety of reasons. Is in India, a lot of the cultural inertia was towards folks getting a computer science degree. So there was an oversupply of computer science degrees. So a lot of people had basic coding language, and a lot of these people did not really have as many jobs to go after, right? So the BPO was that perfect catalyst for them to become level one, level two engineers. The other constraint was in terms of universities. So the number of universities in India have skyrocketed, right? But it's not just the number, it's the quality of the universities. As the quality of these universities started getting better, you started seeing, even within the BPO industry, the value, them climbing up the value chain in terms of what they do. So it evolved from level one, level two, butts on seats model to, hey, give us this project, we'll manage it end to end, at least this portion of it, right? And then slowly they continue climbing the ladder, and then you get to a point where you're, building things, you're, building a good chunk of things, right? So then a company like, Facebook or a Microsoft or an Amazon, okay, we're going to have BPOs that are going to do some of the base level work, but we also need our own centers there to capitalize on this upscaling journey that the general populace is going on. So we need our own Microsoft office there. We need our own Amazon office there, and we're going to hire thousands of people, right? And tens of thousands of people. So that's the trajectory. And if you look at parallels in Africa, right? I think there's not that many places where the universities have reached on par with the global standard yet. So in Kenya, for example, we have, I forget the exact number, maybe 30,000 or 50,000 graduates in some sort of a technical background, computer related. How many of those are good enough to, work on top level projects? I'm not sure. But a good chunk of them are good enough to work in level one, level two projects, right? So once these universities in Kenya also mature, where they're the percentage of people they're shelling out to be world class, that's the kind of work that ends up coming, right? I think the where South Africa had a head start was because they have much better universities and university infrastructure compared to a Ghana or a Kenya, right? Same thing with Egypt. They have the numbers. They have, old universities, reputable universities. So the the ecosystem has to be there for that to happen.
If you compare India and China, and you look at the GDP per capita, there's a big difference, right? So we have the China model is exporting manufacturing, and the India model is exporting services, right? On the face of it. And then, like, my colleagues in industrial policy thinking, okay, which sector should a, a government bet on, and in terms of what should we, where should we do our export processing zones? What kind of companies should we let into those? Where should we place our incentives? A lot of my colleagues are saying, well, services hasn't really shown yet that it can be that elevator sector for development, um, the way manufacturing has. So it's striking to me still that we're always looking to India as this success case. And of course, with the individuals that came out of India, absolutely. But the question is that a good thing? Or are we still on the long road? Are these Silicon Valley Indians going to, in the end, reinvest in India? And then India is going to have that big catch up. And I know India isn't just Bangalore or something; it's a big country,
Mhm.
but so is China. And the manufacturing model so far looks like, you look at GDP per capita is like 12,000, and India is like on par with a lot of African countries in a sense, like it's like 2,500. So there's a big gap there. I mean, and I'm asking you, you're in the services industry, so I understand you have a horse in the race, right? Um, but how do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it has to be dual fold. Um, I don't think you can focus on one sector versus the other just because of the scale at which there is, lack of a better word, a lack of an opportunity in these countries, right? So, at a certain level, folks are going to be opportunistic when looking for a job, right? So, India has dropped the ball on manufacturing for a myriad of reasons, right? I mean, if you look post 2020, or even a little bit earlier than that, when folks started divesting from China, this was the perfect opportunity for India to, start bagging the sheets and call everyone there. And they did that to a certain extent, but who really won in that de-investment from China? It's Vietnam, it's Bangladesh, it's the Southeast Asian countries, right? Um, and I don't know the specifics to why that happened. It definitely has to do with policy, it has to do with tax, it has to do with infrastructure. I think India is catching up when it comes to infrastructure, but the policy and the bureaucracy of working in India is still a bit of a mess. And they'll get there. It has to happen a lot faster than it already has. So I'm sure there was an article in the Financial Times the other day. Is Apple quietly pivoting to India because of their over reliance, right? So even in this pivot of Apple to India, a lot of it is just assembly right now, and to get the actual manufacturing capabilities, things like getting the factory specialists from China being able to come in to India and help build some of this knowledge expertise. Even that is running into a lot of bureaucracy. The Chinese nationals are finding it hard to get visas and things like that. So there is still a knowledge gap even from China to India, right? And it's a big one at scale. So in the context of Africa, I it's hard to say whether someone should focus on the services side or the manufacturing side. I think it has to be both. That's the only way you can lift so many people out of poverty like China did. And we upplay China's manufacturing push, but really the services industry in China is incredible, right? Their apps, their software, their drones. It's not just manufacturing; it's the whole ecosystem that goes with it, right? They have e-commerce platforms, communications platforms, everything at world standard now. I mean, the idea that made in China was is not good was like an idea of 20, 30 years ago. That's no longer the case. They're building world class stuff. I think the reason people are afraid of buying Chinese products and stuff is geopolitical, data security, privacy reasons, and there is some validity to that, right? And that's why folks are pivoting to different geographies. So in a country like Kenya, a lot of Kenya's success was branding itself as the Silicon Savannah of Africa, right? So I think it should carry on in that train, but Kenya has a lot of exports in terms of raw materials, produce, vegetables, and stuff. That's been a backbone of Kenyan economy for quite some time. Even a country like South Africa, the reason it was growing, in the early 2000s and before that is because of its manufacturing. It was manufacturing cars, it was manufacturing everything, right? And I don't see massive manufacturing plants coming into Kenya yet. There's many. If you go to the special economic zones, you see pharma manufacturing, you see manufacturing of industrial, paints and this and that. All that is happening, but not to the level where it's going to export to the world. Maybe regionally, it's still so much cheaper to get something shipped in from an India or China to put it in that capex, build the capacity, and then have folks invest the money so you can build and then export it. I think it might happen and it is happening to a certain extent, but that difference is way too big. And that's why even India continues to import so much from China, right? Because the economies of scale in China are so far ahead. Even if labor costs in India are cheaper, they've achieved optimization. They've achieved scale. Even with all the geopolitical tension, India still imports a lot from China.
Right. So, I mean, trying to get to a new market where the labor force isn't skilled in that particular sector, on the face of that sector not having been there before, is the thing that's interesting for us to see. Okay, what global value chains can we integrate a new geography, a new country into? And then you have kind of the two sectors, right, where you're doing that from cities. If we take agro processing out a little bit, for reasons that we can talk about, you can kind of, the two sectors are light manufacturing, kind of electronic assembly or apparel garments,
Mhm.
and the other one is contact centers. You know, doing even back office work, doing then the new tasks of image tagging and social media content moderation. It's got a bad rep, but it's putting people in seats.
Mhm.
So we tried in Ethiopia to try to get the large buyers of the production of light manufacturing of garments, and of course this was way before the war, so it was getting tricky to, yeah, it wasn't easy to get that started. So the consensus kind of in the literature there was like, yeah, you have the value chains that, like you said, they kind of just slowly move down from China to Bangladesh, Vietnam, and there's a lot of cheap labor down there. So there's a lot of cost competitive people in those countries, and they're already really fast and really good at what they're doing. So it's going to be hard to compete on that front. And that's why some of us kind of pivoted and said, okay, well, let's look at services. Can we, the Bangalore model, can we do, this good time zone? It's easy to go to a new location. You don't have to invest so much in the linkages, like in the value chains. It's not, you just technically you just rent a building and you open people's laptops and you can get going. Is that maybe something that's on the one hand more footloose, but that's not so bad if we've got 49 sub-Saharan African countries. So if you're footloose from Kenya, you go into Uganda or Tanzania, that's great. I mean, they need jobs too. Best case scenario, race to the bottom means these BPOs end up in Somalia and Burundi. That would be perfect. So can we? The question that keeps coming back to me is this sector growing in terms of FTE? Is this sector growing in terms of the people that are going to be working in this sector at that level of skill, at that entry level, because that's where most African countries are at? And if so, what do we need to be training right now? That's kind of our research question. That's what we're trying to figure out, and it's super hard. So please help me out with that.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? What do we need to do to upscale these guys? I think so. In the context of our IT outsourcing and development work, for example, right, a lot of the work we do is level one, level two, and about 20 or 30% is level three and above, right? In the IT outsourcing side. So the guys in level one, level two, level three, they need a clear training path to get upskilled. Because again, it's going to be done in stages. Even something as sophisticated as coding. I mean, it's so easy to have this done from ChatGPT, but there's no enterprise solution. You still need a human to prompt it, to engineer the prompt, see if the output is accurate, see if it integrates well with the ecosystem. So that's the gap that exists. And maybe it's resolved within 3 years, maybe five, maybe 10, I don't know, but it will happen. So on the engineering side of things, we're trying to get folks to firstly use AI to see how they can improve their efficiency and then start upscaling, right? To get to the next level, like start building automation, start, even if you're just in the outsourcing uh, projects, like have brainstorming sessions where you're thinking about other products we can create for the local economy, for the regional economy. We haven't had any actual products come out yet, but we're in that journey to see, okay, you guys have 5 years of experience as a software developer. How do we get you to the next level? Can we leverage your experience and do something for the regional economy, right? That could be an option because I think one thing people are underestimating is Africa as a consumer market. It's a ways away from getting there, but that has to be the future. This is going to be the most populous continent in the world, right? So what is the solution for Africa? Like the economy is going to catch up. The demographics are going to be ideal in terms of the world, right? China's populations are declining. Pretty much everywhere else, other than India, is declining. It's only Africa that's rising. So I think getting people to start leveraging their experience from services outside to start building things for Africa, I think is a good next step to figure out how you can, or even to build curriculums more specific to African economies, right? Biotechnology in Kenya, or whatever that industry is that could be budding and very essential to the regional economy. So that's, I think, one thing people can definitely do. Um, on the BPO side of things, I I just don't see how a customer service rep role remains a viable option 5 years from now. I'm a bit nervous that there's so much being put into let's get 50,000 BPO jobs. Okay, that's fine, but what are those jobs going to be, right? Is it going to be customer service? Is it going to be something like a finance and accounting, a little more sophisticated, or the answer isn't clear. But I just know that in 5 years, there, or whatever that time frame is, there will be a bit of a reckoning. And I think they need to. I don't know the answer, to be honest, because a lot of these guys will have to look for other jobs.
So you mentioned twice now skilling via AI. So part of s- skilling yourself, for lack of a better term, has to do with getting to know these AI, generative AI, ChatGPT, Anthropic Claude, Google Gemini, getting a feel for what they're like and what they can do and maybe what they can't do. Now, the younger you are, the less you're going to actually know what they can do. You're not going to be able to know where it's actually performing well and where it isn't. And that's where you run the risk of a lot of times having young people use this thing to cheat, right? To just take its answer and run with it. So, yes, we need to use these things and we need to get comfortable with them. We need to know how to drive these vehicles. But still, there's this parallel comes to mind with there was this debate about pilots, could this Sully who landed the plane on the Hudson River, could a pilot nowadays have been able to land that? We were lucky that this was an old guy because he actually knew how to fly a plane. All the newer pilots are all just really reliant on the equipment. Is that there's a trade-off, right? You need to know that you can use a calculator but also do your times tables in your head in order to get fast at thinking.
Yeah.
Right? So if we say, okay, well, let's leapfrog, let's have the Kenyan upskilling. We have all these digital skilling institutions in the ecosystem in Nairobi. Let's all focus on getting everybody a plus subscription and everybody's using ChatGPT now. That could be great because these young people can find a niche, but it probably already is backfiring because they're using it to turn in their papers and getting degrees they don't deserve.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. There's definitely going to be negative repercussions of this, right? But I don't agree with your earlier statement where you said the young people may not necessarily know what to do with it. At least, I don't want to say better or worse. It's different. I think generational use of these things are different. I think young folks, the curiosity is incredible, right? And they have been brought up in the age of information and brought up in the age of Instagram and TikTok and widely available information exposure, right? So they're not as wired into a box. So if you think of it in that way, they are likely, and I've seen it at least in many places, is they're more creative. They do think outside the box. Maybe it's also the case that yeah, people will cheat. People will try to get by and use it to, in fact, reduce their scope of work. Right? It's a fine line between using ChatGPT to cheat and using it to increase your productivity. Right? So let's say a student, I mean, this is more of a philosophical question, if you will, but let's say a student has beautifully engineered this prompt and really put in the time and effort to have, an AI agent like ChatGPT come up with a very nuanced research paper. Is that cheating? Yeah, legally, probably yes. But is that the direction we're heading at? Also, probably true, right? But there's also, it's a self-selection thing too. Curious people will really get the maximum mileage out of these things. Lazy
Yeah.
people will be like, all right, I'll just type in a two-word prompt, I'll get the answer submitted, that's my work done for the day. Right. So
Yeah.
I think self-selection is a big factor here. And this the same concept as in work from home, right? Work from home, is that a solution for everyone? No, I think it probably sucks for most people. But in self-selection, the really bright guys who thrive on the fact that they have 2 extra hours of productivity will perform much better. That they don't have to worry about my hour-long commute or 2 hour-long commute. I can work from home. That means I don't have to worry about my kids or my family or anything else. Like I can really focus on my work. So a lot of it does have to do with self-selection. I think at the end of the day, curious people will be curious, and those who aren't. And it doesn't help that the there's so much information out there that generally maybe we're becoming, you know, more we're getting used to convenience rather than effort and curiosity. I don't know if there's statistics or information to back this up. I think we're used to instant gratification, so maybe the percentage of people who are curious and percentage of people who self-fulfill into lazy work is widening, but I think that dynamic still exists.
Can you come into sci-fi with me for a minute? Just kind of think through with me. I mean, let's rule out a couple of scenarios because in those cases, I mean, I wouldn't have an idea. So if artificial general intelligence has a fast takeoff to artificial super intelligence, and then we're this thing's pets, who knows what life is going to be. Then we don't really need to be talking about BPO jobs. We can talk about our jobs and like any jobs, right? And what does it even mean to make money? So let's assume there's going to be work for people in the foreseeable future, which there's a decent history backs that up, right? We've been at this point before, never quite as interesting as now, but at the time, of course, not seeing the future, there's some crazy changes that happened in history to humans where we thought, oh wow, this is changing everything. And it did in a way, but then in another way it didn't. Like we kind of came through. With one exception, we have this horse analogy, right? We have the biological muscle power that actually did get automated away. So now is biological brain power going to get automated away? Let's leave that scenario aside and say, well, there is going to be a version of BPO GBS in 10 years, 15 years. What does that look like? What is it? Managers of AI agents? And who do they work for? Do they work for individuals or do they still work for the big airlines or telcos?
Interesting. Why would, oh, you mean like what we were talking about earlier where the BPO is bypassed and you just directly hire a manager of AI agents sitting somewhere in Nairobi, for example. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So, Nick Clark of BCG, I spoke with him the other day, and he's got this thing on Substack called Service Matters. Super nice read. And the last couple weeks, he's been going on about this idea of individualized BPO. So to me, and this is not, he didn't say this, I'm kind of just, to me, I really like how Apple really seamlessly offers me of a wall between me and service providers by saying, hey, you want to use a pseudonym email? And I oftentimes don't even know which one. I just press yes, and then it just generates an email for me. I mean, that's kind of the opposite of me always having to unclick cookies everywhere. That companies are just kind of trying to psychologize me, what would I actually want to buy, and then like having these kind of sales calls get creepier and creepier. Maybe there's a bit of a utopian wish that I have, that we kind of can turn this on its head, and I can have my army of bots, not the BPOs that are trying to sell me stuff, but they my in a way that's happening. So to just kind of see, where's that evolutionary battle between buyer and seller of, I mean, to some extent, I feel like if AI does all kinds of A/B testing on people's psychology and they get more data on you, it's going to be tricky. You probably shouldn't answer your phone anymore, because it's going to somehow hypnotize you into buying something, right? If it's allowed to, right? So
Yeah,
we need regulation against that.
yeah,
I
for
get me sitting in Europe talking about we need regulation.
sure.
That's kind of funny.
Not the right
But
climate for regulation.
sorry.
Not the right climate for regulation.
Right, right, right. So, but how do you, just think about this with me? And I know it's hard, but like, is there going to be, the demographics in Africa, how many people are coming onto the labor market. If we can put butts in seats, what are they going to be doing? And what is the skill they're going to need for that if the AI does the other stuff?
Right. I mean, the easy answer is you're going to need more managers sort of overlooking what the AI does. So at a more strategic level, deciding if this is the right campaign to take. Let's say your AI spits out these metrics saying, these are the buyer intent. This is, X statistic, Y statistic for this company. Here are some options. Maybe it gives you some options, right? And it gives you some statistical probability spectrum of the chance of success for each of these options. You take a creative decision. You trust your intuition. You trust your gut. These are things that AI doesn't have right now. So that's definitely a case. But would you need 100 people answering calls if an agent can do it? I mean, think about it. Would you? Probably not, right? It's a pretty simple answer. So these guys are going to have to figure out something else to do. And I'm not just saying these guys. I'm saying a lot of different types of roles, not just BPO, but like let's take the various. Okay, so in your opinion, what are the main BPO roles that are coming into Africa right now, and based on folks you've talked to?
I think it's still CX. I mean, so we have customer, like, voice, non-voice, I guess, and then you have this well, social media content moderation. Nobody talks about it, but it needs to be done. Everybody wants to be harsh, harsh about it, but people are still doing it. I mean, the platforms are changing. I mean, that this X is changing, and Facebook is changing. I don't know how that's evolving. If that's going to make there's going to be some version of it still. Like, some things are still need to be flagged and need to be taken down, and to what extent AI can already do that. And then data labeling, working on data reinforcement learning. I don't know if how much reinforcement learning is actually being done, because we've had a lot of bad press about it. So again, uh, I'm not enough aware of the ins and outs of the ITO industry in that sense, and large language model, like, what's the demand for that work. So that's kind of where I'm kind of creeping around asking people like you,
Yeah.
what's happening? Like where are jobs growing for people, and is this temporary? I mean, these are jobs that have been created with AI. Without AI, we wouldn't have these jobs. So I'm imagining there will be other jobs that might be created with AI, with future versions of AI that we don't. Like, had you asked me 3 years ago, what's reinforcement learning, I would have no clue. I would have no idea what that means. Had you asked me 10 years ago what's data labeling, I mean, or 15 years ago, whatever, like I wouldn't have known. um I still don't really know what an influencer is, but that's, I think, says more about me than
I think you are an influencer.
uh,
Once you get these
that's just how
podcasts in
yeah, that's how I lured you on here, but I'm not, don't trust me.
line. Yeah, look, based on what you've said so far, Elvis, if and you're right about this, the majority of the BPO work that is coming into Africa is in this TX space, um, and to me, that is the most prime for automation role there could be, right? You know, maybe folks are still banking on the fact that humans like human interaction, and that is true. But my point is, even though that might be true, our behaviors are going to change faster than anyone anticipated. So even let's say in a call center environment, and I don't have numbers on this, but I've talked to enough folks who run operations to sort of get a hint, right? The generational divide between folks who want to talk to someone on the phone and who'd rather just get it done through chat is huge, right? Folks 40 plus, maybe even 50 plus, would rather talk to a person, right? That's the habit that has been formed. But
In certain sectors, I mean, in certain things, I used to go to a travel agency with my grandmother when we booked a flight to Spain. I haven't been since.
right,
So in certain areas, and I'm in that demographic, right? So in some ways, I'd like to speak to people, but I think in other ways, in the transactions where I'm already comfortable in, which is booking a flight on a website, I don't need to go speak to a person. I don't even need to call a person. Like, that's like, if it works on the website, I'm doing that on the website, even though I'm an old geezer. So sorry,
no,
that just
but
came to
see,
mind.
in this scenario, I think maybe you're not an edge case per se, but you're in a different percentile of exposure to technology, just by virtue of what you've studied and where you are, and vice versa. But let's say you're in rural Germany and living a more traditional life. Again, I know nothing about rural Germany, but a hypothesis: you'd rather go speak to someone because that has been the way of doing things. And
Yeah.
I think that shift is a lot more dynamic. It's like using a phone. Like parents would be struggling to figure out a phone, but now my grandma has WhatsApp. She calls, video calls, sends images, everything. It's easy. So maybe for the generations 30, 40 and above, like it's going to take a little more time, but it will happen. But it someone born in the age of an iPad, I mean, you'd rather not talk to anyone. I mean, a lot of my peers, including myself, we feel a bit awkward when someone just calls you. We're like, wait a minute, what's going on? I'm not expecting a call, right? So I think if you'd rather not be able to speak to someone, the generational shift is going to sort of push you towards just have bots and voice agents, right? Yes, there's going to be specific cases where you need a human creativity, and it's hard to identify generally, but just think of instances like negotiation, like empathy, like specific industries, maybe like healthcare, patient, aftercare or something like that. I don't know the exact answer, but there are niches where you're going to need human elements. But en masse, like if I'm booking an airline ticket and I'm having issues, I think a voice bot would probably be more efficient getting the answer done because it would go through the entire scope of what is possible, right? So yeah, I mean, going back to that earlier point on the most easily automatable ones or the least complicated ones, right? So a customer service, I'm not saying this is an easy job by any means. It's incredibly hard for these agents. But, if the skill level required is, you have to understand a product catalog, you have to understand a response decision tree, Like this is much more efficient with the machine. Maybe the machine doesn't have, the concern that maybe I'm displaying in my voice, or the tremor, or the happiness, or the smile. Like people say, when you smile you can hear it on the phone, right? So maybe it doesn't have that, but maybe it's a matter of time before it gets there again.
It's going to have that. I mean, it's already kind of, there's a couple studies out there that AI is a lot more empathetic than a lot of professionals, or like it comes across as more empathetic, right?
Yeah.
Um, I'm wondering though, there's a lot of things that I have so many bottlenecks on my desk every day as a small business that it's just, there's so many things that I'm hoping there would just be a YouTube video for, that just somebody explains this to me and why is this not working now, right? And kind of the large language models are almost there, but having a person to work with, if that person isn't in the same room as you, it makes less and less of a difference. It's still great. Having this podcast in person would be better. I'm certain of that. Um, there's something different to being in the same room, but having someone who is cost competitive in the room to help you through things. So, for example, here in Germany, we have a big problem with tax advisors and accountants, like bookkeepers. Like they they don't take small companies because it's not worth it for them, and they're expensive. And when they do take you, they don't take that good care of you because you're not the client that they want, right? So there's a huge potential for unlocking or unknotting that knot, untying that knot of tax advice. That would be one area. And another one, and I'm not get too personal, marriage counsel. I mean, there's a lot of people who really can't figure out their private lives, and I would count myself as one of them. And you're just wondering, man, I just can't be so hard. Like I need to. I mean, there's other people, other males and females who are trying to get along and having a hard time. So I know there's research on this out there. I just can't really afford to have a professional, and I'm not sure if that particular professional is like going to tell us the right things, right? Having some kind of like more of a transparent meritocratic service for the masses would be hugely beneficial, right? And having that, you have this concept of paramedics, right? You have people who aren't doctors, they didn't go to university for 7 years to medical school, but they can do a lot of the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I would love someone like that for our marriage. I mean, just someone who just kind of helps us out and just says, oh, well, try this or try that, or just a third person there in the room. So those are just two things that come to mind where I think there's so much space on the map, white space on the map that we can fill with eager young people, happy to learn, happy to specialize on the job, right? There's so much learning that happens once you get out of university and into the job. You get into a BPO, and then it's not a BPO anymore, but it's like a consultancy that branches off into certain fields, be it healthcare, be it tax advice, be it psychology, kind of, and provide better services. I don't know, is that utopian? I just feel there's a lot of area for humans to help in collaboration with AI. If we don't get this superhuman AI, which in that case all bets are off, of course.
Right. I don't think it's utopian. I think there is there is a possibility that in specific cases we become a bit jaded with AI and we're just craving that human interaction. Um, and like you said, like a marriage counselor, you're not going to sit in front of a Google Home Mini and have that tell you and your wife what to do, or analyze that. It's just maybe maybe we're thinking in a short term period, but maybe 20 years from now, it's a different case. But at least right now, that's not going to happen, right? So there's a lot of human centric elements, physical hospitality, physical service industry. I think is going to become a big one. Wellness, arts enhanced by AI. The fact that you can make a music video, edit it, and shell it out, so much quicker. That's definitely a possible career, right? The fact that you can start doing these podcasts, getting more information out. That's the one thing that is so cheap right now is creating content, and there's so much consumption of content, and you're seeing this entire burst of an industry in influencers, content creators, podcast show hosts. That's definitely an element because what do you do when you have free time? You want to consume something, right? And you content is free. I mean, you have to sit through 5 YouTube ads or whatever that is, but that's free. So that's definitely an area I think people and on the technology side of things, like maybe people start thinking of bigger solutions, right? Solutions more centric to their world, right? What is a fintech problem that's more acute to the rural Kenya rather than Nairobi? What's a biotech solution that's more specific to improving the health of tilapia in Lake Victoria, or I don't know the
Mm,
specific
mm.
terminology here, but there's going to have to be a niche, right? And I think the big unknown right now is Africa going to play a part in the growth of Africa? Is Africa going to build for Africa, or are we just going to consume things that have been made outside? And that's going to be the tricky bit because right now the money is looking outside, other than a very select few companies, right? It's the BPO. I mean, if you're catering to the BPO industry domestically in Kenya, it's a really really tough business to be in terms of margins, in terms of anything for that matter. So a lot of companies are looking abroad. So these are some examples that off the top of my head. I think on a technical level, even today, if you, as someone who is playing around with AI, who understands the solution landscape, who can differentiate the bullshit from the substantial solutions out there, that's a big value add because I'm willing to say like 80% of the solutions out there are just wrappers, that it really, if you brought someone on board, you can build it yourself for a much, much cheaper cost, right? So someone who can swift through the nonsense and actually build something that is specific for your company, I think that's definitely where a lot of technical folks should maybe be looking at, and start thinking enterprise because that's where the big gap is right now. Enterprise solutions, like you can't plug and play enterprise solutions. Everything is agentic. Everything is consumer based, right? So folks who can very creatively and technically compile the right workflows that integrate with databases, your repositories, your stakeholders. Those are the folks that are really going to be successful out there. So AI consultancies, like helping businesses adopt it as fast as possible. I think that's, at
Right.
least even today, that is an output for a lot of folks. But you have to be technically, like, you don't have to be a really competent software engineer, but you have to understand the infrastructure. You have to understand the business logic. You have to understand, because even with low code, you can build a lot of these automations yourself, right? So that's definitely things that people should look into.
So it is skilling people to actually keep up with I mean, so this is something you're opening a can of worms there for me because since in the last 2 years, if people ask me what podcast should I listen to, the podcast that I would have suggested a year ago for someone starting out now, it's already a bit of a climb in the sense of like all the jargon because it just automatically happens, right? Like you try to keep it jargon free, but then it gets more and more and it's not that hard and you have a little bit of the cursive knowledge you because I know it that it's easy.
Mhm.
I think other people should know it, but then they get confused. So having someone in house who actually keeps up with it, actually delegating a few people maybe depending on how big your house is, to just be the AI chief officer, even if that person doesn't have a technical background, just to keep in touch with it, is going to save companies a lot of money, I think, because I get really allergic. I get like, there's a lot of consultants kind of, I always dislike the term prompt engineering because I always felt engineering was a big word for what that actually was. And just like, it's three tricks, two of them don't work anymore with reasoning models. So I don't know if we should have called that engineering, but there's a bunch of those things where people are making money, but then in a sense that's, it's a bit what I do too. I try to help companies get there, but I think a lot of that they can do themselves. So if you have an ecosystem of young people that want to attract new companies, that want to keep kind of the BPOs flowing into that ecosystem, would you say the digital skilling organizations should kind of rebrand themselves as AI skilling organizations? Like, we have a lot of, at the universities, we have a lot of internet institutes. Like, we have the Internet Institute of this, the Internet in Society, or the Internet in that. And I wonder sometimes, what are these Internet institutes? Like, is this just the word, you know, for the new thing, and it's actually not the new thing anymore? So these are going to be AI institutes soon. So that's what I think of when we talk about digital skilling.
Right.
I don't know if there's any more analog skilling out there anywhere. So everything is digital pretty much. So I don't know what digital skilling means anymore. So it probably should be more like working with generative AI, getting a subscription. And so I'm kind of nudging you towards, if you were, say, the Minister of Education or the Minister of ICT and Youth in Kenya, what would your next version of Ajira Digital be for creating that ecosystem in Nairobi that can then attract or build locally the next version of GBS firms, whatever they will be?
Yeah. That's a really tough question, and I'm not jealous of the Minister of Education for having to make it. But I think rather than thinking of AI institutions, I mean, you can call it what you want to. There'll be, fads. Right now, the fad is everything is .ai, right? The AI is the medium, right? You still need to use AI for a specific use case or a specific purpose. So just, it's not like 5 or 6 years ago you could, get a bunch of people trained on machine learning, and that is training in itself. Like you can't just get trained on AI and then what, right? What are you going to do with that AI? So you still AI, in my opinion, will become already has become so commoditized that it is almost like using an operating system, almost like using knowing how to use Excel properly, right? If you know how to download an LLM Studio and play around with packages and build that infrastructure, you can use it. That's what the training needs to be, and that training will become pretty moot very quickly because it's so simple, it's so straightforward, right? Once you get over that initial barrier of the fact that there's so much jargon and this is new and I don't understand where this is, or there's a new name for this package, is llama better for reasoning and is this better for coding? Once you get over that knowledge gap, then you know how to use the the operating system AI. Then what are you going to do with it, right? I think people still need to be very technically adept in finance, in biotechnology, in healthcare, in science, in research, in analytics, and whatever that is. The AI is that operating system that's going to help you get there. So it's not like you're going to stop churning out engineers. You're going to use these engineers to. The engineers are going to use the AI to figure out what then to do. Like if now hypothetically Kenya has such a large, energy grid, right? It's sitting on so much, what's the right word? Geothermal energy, right?
Yeah.
And they're really making an effort to get it connected to the grid properly, and it's a huge boost. I mean, you could invite data centers, you could invite, all of these things. So now, as an AI society in Kenya, maybe the question could be, hey, how do we leverage this geothermal boom and figure out how best to transform energy, how best to transform data centers, how best to transform infrastructure, connectivity, what else can we do with it, and can we speed it up, right? That's something that I think it could be really helpful in. It's yeah, I mean it's hard to know, but I think folks who figure out how to use AI will end up figuring out where they can apply it. It's one of those things where maybe there's a few visionaries in the world who can actually see what 10 years down the line looks like. The rest are a mix of skeptics and optimists who know that based on historical statistics, no matter how big that technological jump, humans have always figured it out. So if history is anything to go by and statistics is anything to go by, we'll figure it out. And in each of these major technological jumps, people thought it was going to be an existential crisis, right? In each of these. And we tend to look at things from rose colored glasses, as one of my friends likes to say. Like when the radio first came out, people were complaining about how kids are never going to do anything. They're just going to listen to the radio all day. Then the TV came out, then the iPad came out, then the thing. It definitely has some negative impacts, but there is also this concept of rose colored glasses that we're looking at now very differently from what has happened. I don't know what we'll end up doing, but I know it'll be something that is not going to lead to this apocalyptic situation or dystopia.
Right. 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 You said at the beginning that we are the right amount of worried about it. I think I'm going to call this podcast that. We're just the right amount of worried about it. I like that. Um, yeah, I heard Bill Gates recently say that we're never going to watch robots play baseball.
There you go.
I thought there's something interesting. So the human element, right? The soap operas. We're never going to. I mean, we've had vehicles for a long time that are faster than 100-meter sprinters. Yet we love watching the 100-meter sprint at the Olympics.
Mhm.
Tennis, the human struggle, the psychological struggle of dominating one another in a sport where and it's just we're seeing it in a physical sport where people have skill, but I don't think that's nearly why we watch sports so interested. It's mostly about,
It's the
did that person.
randomness of it, right? It's the human fallibility aspect of it. So anything could happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anything could happen. And also, can that person overcome their challenge, their struggle? In tennis is for me, it's the most obvious one. Everyone can see which of these two players is now really struggling and for which of whom it's going really well. And then when it flips, all of a sudden the other one is doing well and the first one is like really struggling. And nobody, including the two players, knows why. And it's just the willpower, this overcoming your human struggle and I'm wondering if there's a mixture of that. I'm not thinking of entertainment like gladiators, so like what a version of Big Brother.
Yeah.
Everybody will be watching
Watching.
people struggle for the sake of struggling. Maybe there's an element of that, but struggling in the sense of creating something, building something together with AI, exploring the crust underneath us or the stars out there. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I get what you're trying to say, and that we'd have to find something to do. I just feel like there's so much that has to be done that I think we're a ways away from, what's that quote? Learning how to play, right? I think there's so much, right? There's social elements are going to be really tricky for AI to solve. So socioeconomic factors. Yeah, I don't think can solve geopolitics. There's so many things like that, right? What about research in healthcare, research in sciences, biology, chemistry, physics? I mean, like we've come so far, but we have no idea how much further there is to get to. So maybe we are encouraging more scientists, or maybe we're encouraging people who don't have a PhD in biology to become scientists and leverage an AI agent to start probing it and asking questions, playing around, experimenting, right?
Right.
But there has to be a base level of security for that, like in terms of, okay, I don't have a job. Can I sustain myself in my period of exploration and research? So the shock will be felt, but that will be a temporary shock. I think the trajectory is still upwards in terms of our ability to find things out. I mean, the list of things we don't know is endless, right? I think even when we know things, we realize there's more things that we need to find out, right? Space becomes a frontier. Space industry might become a frontier. I mean, we're talking, a little bit further out here, but there's so much
Yeah,
more.
like 2 years at least.
I mean, Elon Musk says he wants to be in Mars by when? In the next five
I think
years?
next week.
There you go.
He's taking all that saved USAID money.
Right. So that there's so much for us to know, and I even have to remind myself to get encouraged by this, because in the day to day operations of business and stuff, you get bogged down and maybe even overwhelmed with the implications of AI rather than putting that time to think about what can you do. Like, are you just going to sit in front of a computer one day with no intention whatsoever and just play around with this to the extent that you can? And maybe it's not one day, maybe you do it for 2 months and then you figure something out, right? So a lot of people, including myself, were getting a bit overwhelmed and a bit bogged down with more business oriented, thinking. And that's fair because we have businesses to run and we have, revenue and profitability and employees and shareholders to take care of. Fine. But I think the real solution is going to happen when the dust settles a little bit and we figure out what to do with, all of the unknowns. If there's other industries out there, right? And that's the optimist side of me. I'm generally a skeptic, but I'm a data person, and every time there's been a major upheaval, and I agree, there's nothing like this that has happened before in terms of scale and repercussions, but we will figure it out. I don't know if that's faith or statistics. And I'm
All
not a
right,
very
Rahul.
religious person, so statistics.
Great, great. Rahul, thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Cheers,
talking to
Alex.
me.
It's been lovely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been really fun. I'd like to do this again, and maybe in a month when we have the AI overlord and we can bring it on,
Yeah.
ask it for an audience. Uh, so
So
yeah, it's
here's an
yeah,
interesting idea, right? What if
yeah.
it's two people and an AI doing a podcast? Has that happened? I haven't
So,
seen it, but
so there's some things that are interesting and some things that really kind of turn me off. So Notebook LM, I mean, a friend of mine works at Google, and great people and great thing. But Notebook LM, this idea of turning something into a document into a podcast, right? Between two, I know that's not what you asked, but between two AIs, and they're discussing it. It's hard for me to listen to that, and it's hard for me to understand the gist of what people are getting out of it because they find everything fascinating. They cannot tell the difference. Like I've put a friend of mine put a contract in it from his gym membership, and they were fascinated by this company's name, and it was just it's just there's
Elvis,
no
I think
nuance,
we
there's
need
no
to
level.
start questioning podcasts in general because it's trained on podcasts, and it just shows that everyone on podcasts finds everything fascinating.
Right, right. Actually, I was recently told I say that word too much. So, uh, but then there's other things that I saw. This is a while back. I don't know if I can find this still, but so there was the inverse Turing test. Have you heard of this?
No.
So they've done there's somebody kind of did a computer game where, and I don't know what environment this was, but it was a kind of like I want to say Second Life, but that's dating me. Like a metaverse, where there's a train compartment, and there's 5 historical figures sitting in there. There's Genghis Khan, Cleopatra, Caesar, etc., Bismarck, and they
Eclectic.
each go around and say stuff about themselves, and the conductor comes in and says, okay, I found out we have a human amongst us. Each of you please introduce yourselves, and from on the basis of that introduction, the others everybody needs to try to find out who among us is the human. Obviously we're seeing this from the human's perspective, like the avatar, and everybody goes around, and these AIs are obviously perfect of rattling off a TED talk about Cleopatra, right? And then it comes to, I think it was Genghis Khan. He was Genghis Khan, and he starts talking about, the Mongols, and it's just terrible. Like, I would, off the top of my head, try to, hold a presentation about Genghis Khan. And the AIs, I think 3 out of 4 all kind of pointed to him as being the human. Like, they were like, I think Genghis Khan is the human, because that presentation was suboptimal. And in that sense, like, this inverse Turing test is actually true, right? Like, we are no, I mean, I'm awful at math compared to a calculator. So obviously there's this jagged frontier that these things are better at other things. And then there's things where people have like 2 phones next to each other, and they have ChatGPT talk to another ChatGPT, and they go back and forth a few times, and then they get stuck in a loop. So far it's not that great, but I do think there's some interesting things really close, almost like this instant translation for BPOs. I can almost smell it. It's almost there, but not quite. So maybe in a month or 2 months, we'll have a 3-way
At the
conversation
pace.
with whatever. Yeah,
Yeah. No,
yeah, yeah.
like you said, we're gonna have to prove we're humans by demonstrating our fallibility.
Right, you're right.
Yeah,
Actually, that's what it is, right? When you do the captchas, right? Like when you
right.
click on whether or not you're human, because it's so random the way you're doing it,
So
right? Like when
it
you
tracks, how terribly inefficient your mouse movements are.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's what it does. Hey, Rahul, thanks for doing this. I kept you quite long. I think you have your next call coming up.
yeah, in about half an hour. So we're good.
Okay. All right. All right.
Cheers.
So I'll stop this and you stay on for a minute.
Yeah,
So, all right. Thank you for doing this.
absolutely.